So we have these facts also on your first sheet before we turn it over. Author is Moses. Undisputed, everything points to Moses being the author of everything from Genesis to Deuteronomy. One other thing in the Bible written by Moses, anybody know what it is? Psalm 90. Yeah. Surely a man's years are 70 or 80 if he has the strength. Yeah. Can you imagine being the pastor where for 40 years more than 1 million Israelites die and you have to do their funerals? You know how many funerals a day that is? No, it's like 68 actually, or something like that. But I was thinking it's an awful lot of German potato salad and ham sandwiches. Now, there were days where Dathan and Abiram rebelled and whole families and hundreds got swallowed up and the earth burped and so forth. But there were also days where, there were just the 60 or so, but maybe a couple light days at only 20 funerals. Wow. And no scripture yet. Moses is the first one to put pen to paper, to begin writing the scriptures. So prior to Moses, how did the stories of Genesis get passed down? How many spikes are there in the game of telephone? Well, Adam to at least Enoch. Because the next, Methuselah is not quite born yet. So we got to go to Enoch. That's 1 to 1. Enoch, however, would have gotten us to Methuselah. Methuselah gets us all the way to the year the ark floats, because he died the year of the flood. So we go then to Seth. Seth knew Abraham. That's how far that takes us out. If then we just include Seth, perhaps actually, then he certainly would have known Eber. I can skip Abraham altogether, because Seth to Eber takes us all the way down to Jacob. And then to Joseph, who is there just a couple of generations before. So we've got Adam, Enoch, Methuselah, Seth, Eber, Jacob is only 6. And we are to then Joseph getting down to Moses. Yes?
I've read that the average illiterate Bedouin child can recite 44 generations of their family.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's a lot.
To be illiterate is not to be dumb,
Right.
or to be unaware of many, many facts. It just means you've never been taught how to read or write. So, yeah.
That goes back to Abraham more or less.
I don't know. I knew a Jew, a rabbi, who had his entire genealogy written out back to Adam. 2 spiral-bound notebooks. Rabbi Warren Kahn. Yeah. So Moses writes at the foot of Mount Sinai, 1446 to about 1445, while the Jews are there. Place of writing, Mount Sinai, and in the wilderness beyond Sinai on the way to Kadesh. They were at Kadesh for most of the 40-year sojourn. They occasionally were not there, but they went there more than once, and it was a huge valley, big enough for all 2 million, and surrounded by a ring of hills, and there was a water supply. God himself opened up for them, a stream that gushed. If you can imagine, not just the bath water at full strength, but the fire hydrant going. You know when they clean out the fire hydrants in the spring? Imagine that going for 40 years on the north rim of the valley where you live. There fresh water? Yeah, there's fresh water. So, anything about the background of Exodus? We don't know if this is the moment, but it's been speculated that Moses invented The linear way of writing Hebrew, that prior to this, the Phoenicians, who used the same alphabet and dialect, the northwestern Semitic, that it was written in something called Boustrophon before this, where you would write as the ox plows. So you go this way, then down and then go this way, then down and then go this way, and then go this way. It's been speculated, though, I wrote a paper about this in school, that Moses, probably left-handed, started over here and wrote this way to get the ink, keep the ink off his hand as he writes, and then he just starts again below and does it again, and does it again, and Hebrew, a Semitic script written right to left, is born. Moses did not use the kind of Hebrew that I first learned when we were learning Hebrew in school. That is Hebrew using the Aramaic alphabet from after the time of the exile. They brought that slightly better alphabet with them. It's easier to work with and so forth. Moses used the Phoenician alphabet where the last letter of the alphabet, the letter Tav, which means mark, is shaped like this. Like a T or a cross. When God put a mark on Cain, was it the sign of the cross? Something like that. I mean, literally, that's what it says, is he put the Tav on him. And Alpha, or an Aleph rather, is the Hebrew word for bull. And in the script that Moses used, it would have been like a sideways capital A with the lines sloppily drawn, which is a sideways way of drawing the head, ears, and horns of a bull, and so forth. So Beit or Bayit was a diagonal, like a tent with ground. That's the word for house or tent. Actually, Ohel is tent, but Bayit is house, and so forth. Bayit Lechem, house of bread, is what village? Bethlehem. Yeah. And on and on. Gimel has a big hump in the middle of it. Why? Because Gimel means camel. So just pictures of these critters and so forth. That's the Phoenician alphabet. Way to go, Aaron. Dalek. No, that's Doctor Who. That's a robot. All right. Let's get to the text. This now, if you like, I have a couple questions on the second sheet of the handout. We'll kind of get to some of these, most of them perhaps. Ele Shemot, it starts in Hebrew, which is what the title of the book is in Hebrew. These are the names. What an uninteresting title. Why would they call it that? Because when you unroll the scroll, that's the first word that you see. So that's the name of the book. If we did that with books, what would The Hobbit be called? In a hole in the ground? In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. So you just call the book by, or it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. What book is that? Tale of Two Cities, right? So that's just how it goes. That's how they identified their ancient books. Should I do 3 or 4 more, or should we just go on? All righty, let's keep going. Although Dr. Seuss did that. 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. That's just the name of the book, right? That's like the Cat in the Hat. Yeah, okay, all right. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family. Please count on your fingers if you have to. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. How many is that? 11, right? Who's missing? No, he's there. Why is Joseph not on the list? He was already there. That's all. Sometimes it's as simple as that. He was already there. He didn't go down to Egypt with Jacob. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Oh, Moses, you tell us. But we have this perplexing number 70. I'd like to do this quickly if you don't mind. I did it slowly this morning, so if you really want to go back and listen to that video, you can later. But Genesis 46 says this: all those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting the sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. The next verse says, with the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family, which went to Egypt, were 70 in all. And then along comes our friend in the New Testament. I'm forgetting his name. I read him this morning, or just a little while ago. Stephen. I'm so embarrassed. Sorry, Stephen. Stephen says, after this, Joseph sent for his father Jacob and his whole family, 75 in all. So, one verse in Genesis says 66. The next verse in Genesis says 70. Exodus, that we just read, says 70. And Stephen says 75. Which number is correct? They are all correct. That's right. 66 is correct because it subtracts the dead sons of Judah, and Onan, and it doesn't count Ephraim and Manasseh. That's the 66. 70 in Exodus is a pretty round number, and in Genesis, it is the number of holiness, 7, times the number of completeness, which is 10, and they were pretty close to 70, so 70 is right. Stephen quotes from the Greek Old Testament, as do many New Testament speakers and writers. Half the time, Jesus quotes the Greek, and half the time, Jesus just translates himself out of the Hebrew. The same as Paul. Jesus and Paul are both about 50-50. Are we using the Septuagint, the People's Bible, or are we using this other? So does it matter which translation we use? Sometimes, maybe not so much. That to me is one of the biggest declarations in Scripture, that if I want to use the NIV one week, but want to use maybe my own translation the week after, that's probably okay. As long as I say it, right? I should tell you what I'm using. Have you heard me preach saying the words, we follow my own translation? Have you heard me say that? Yeah. I said it all summer, preaching out of Matthew. I said it all summer. So anyhow, and by the way, the 75 in the Septuagint, the Greek, they do count the sons of Ephraim, the two sons of Ephraim and the 2 sons of Manasseh. Not only do they count the boys, but their children and a grandson of Manasseh. So Joseph's great-grandson is even counted in that list. So that's where the 75 comes from. All the numbers are right. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. Pretty old, too. But the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so the land was filled with them. Listen to Moses do what Moses does so well. Remember when we were telling the story, when you read the story of the flood, and Moses with his words makes the waters rise and grow and increase and fill the land and cover the mountains, and Moses just does it with his words. And later, I had this in the scripture lesson at the college on Sunday afternoon. I was liturgist. And we did it with the waters covering over Pharaoh's chariots, where the waters grew and came down and covered them and buried them, and there they were, and they sank like lead and so forth. And here he does it again with the increase of the people of Israel. They were fruitful. They multiplied greatly, became exceedingly numerous. The land was filled with them. How can your voice not get louder as you read that? That's just what Moses does to you. He's a great storyteller. And then a new king, remember, new kingdom, 18th dynasty. The Hyksos had been in charge, this Semitic tribe, very much like the Israelites, these guys. And now they're gone, but the Israelites are still here. And so this new king didn't know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt, one of the Thutmoses, probably Thutmose the second. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. Did you follow his point there?
They're too numerous, but they don't want to leave the country.
Right. There are too many of them, and they might leave. What? So what's the problem? Why was, at this point, why was Israel valuable to Pharaoh?
Well, they must have been producing food if they ate.
Remember, they were not yet slaves. They were raising what livestock? Sheep. The Egyptians used sheep for three things at least. For food, for clothing, and for Egyptian worship, sacrifices. So they used the sheep. They didn't want to deal with the sheep themselves, but they used the sheep for everything. And the Israelites were great shepherds. They were happy to be shepherds. They got the land of Goshen. They got to have all the sheep that they wanted. And so he doesn't want them to stop producing sheep, but he doesn't want them to join against their enemies, and he doesn't want them to leave either. So it's this, I guess Pharaoh wanted to have his cake and eat it too. So again, this is where it happens then. They put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. I just got done telling you that the name of the Pharaoh of the Exodus was Thutmose, right? What do you see in this verse that makes you go, "Are you sure, Pastor?" Ramses. Where have you heard the name Ramses? What movie? The Ten Commandments. It's in the Cecil B. DeMille, Charlton Heston movie, right? With John Derrick as Joshua. Shall I go on with the cast? No, I won't. But Celia Lovsky is in that movie. She played T'Pau in Star Trek later on. Anyway, that huge, splashy movie. And they decided that they were going to go with cutting-edge biblical criticism and go with Ramses as the Pharaoh of the Exodus. When the movie was made, that's what the critics of the Bible said. If anybody was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, it was Ramses. The problem is Ramses is 200 years too late. Now, if these cities, Ramses and Pithom, basically in Goshen here, if they're there, how do we account for the city called Ramses here if we don't say, there's a verb missing in my sentence here, if we don't acknowledge that Ramses would be born for another 200 years? How can there be a city of Ramses in the book of Exodus? Well, it's possible that the name was something else in Moses' time, and Ramses kind of confiscated the place and gave it his name. For example, Herb, what village in Wisconsin was I born in? Poynette. Which, when it was first settled, was called Oshakada. So where did I grow up? Was it Oshakada or was it Poynette?
Yes.
Well, when I grew up, it was called Poynette. But when the settlers went there 150 years earlier, they called it Oshakada. That was a Native American word. I don't know what it means, but it's there. So when I say that they settled Poynette, I'm really putting the name I know over the top of the word that they used, which could be what Ramses did by taking the city of, I don't know, Ronstown, or whatever it was in Egypt. I'm sure that was it. And then he just renamed it Ramses after himself. There is another possibility. I've told you this before. I'll tell you it again. When I was a missionary in Washington State, I was in the fourth largest county in the United States, counting Texas and Alaska. King County, Washington, goes from the Cascade Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. It includes cities like SeaTac and Seattle and Kent and Maple Valley and Covington and many other large cities. King County was named for, I believe, a 19th century slaveholding politician in the area. When I was there in the late 1990s, there was a movement to change the name of the county from King County to King County. They wanted to rename it after a different guy named King. And that was on the ballot every election while we were there in Washington, and it got passed after we moved to Minnesota. We weren't the deciding votes against or anything like that. I don't even know how I voted for that. But I didn't really care. But although I thought this is a great Bible study illustration, though, I really wanted to hang on to it. They renamed it after Martin Luther King Jr. So John King is out, Martin Luther King Jr. is in, and now all of the county highway maps or signs in Washington have the silhouette of Martin Luther King on them, who never visited Washington State ever in his life. And it has nothing to do with the naming of the original county, but King County. Could it be that Ramses, the city, was named after a different guy named Ramses? And then the Ramses later on, the famous, what was his name? Yul Brynner Ramses, if I may, just got credit for it later on. Make sense? Let's move on. All right. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. That word occurs twice in 2 verses. They made their lives bitter with hard labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. What kind of hard work is there in a field? Well, if you don't have a tractor, all of it, right? From picking stones to harvesting to carrying to hoeing to what else? What am I missing, Dave? Everything to do with field work is difficult without a machine. It's even hard with a machine, but without, yikes. So in all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. And the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were, what a blessing for these women. Their names get put into the scriptures. Shiphrah and Puah. Winnie the Pooh. Anyway, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, very interesting word, delivery stool. If it is a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live. Seriously? Do you think a midwife would do that just because Pharaoh told them to? If the midwives failed to obey Pharaoh, are they disobeying the law?
Yes.
What does Acts tell us? We must obey God rather than men. Doesn't matter what Pharaoh says. I ain't going to kill no baby for no Pharaoh. Right? The midwives, Herb.
I just heard that they were oppressed or slaves only for 40 years.
Well, 80.
Oh, 80.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was all 400.
No, because Joseph, for one thing, was in charge of them for the first 100. So that at least tells us that they weren't slaves the whole time. And there's nothing that tells us here that it was any other way, except for one thing. This edict by Pharaoh applied for killing the boys, which is early in the time of the oppression. It applied to Moses, but not to who? Aaron. Aaron did not fall under the ban of killing the boys of Egypt, of the Israelites. He's only a couple years older than Moses. So it doesn't work out unless the oppression starts just as Stephen says in his sermon, at just about the time that Moses was born. That's when this goes on. So the midwives, however, feared God and did not. That's a great statement, though, Herb. We have to remember that. So they feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" Well, because we took the Hippocratic oath. Well, no, not yet, but anyway. Yeah.
Well, why are there only two midwives?
These are the two who get mentioned. There may have been more, but maybe these were the two who were the instructors of all the others. They were the two that were in charge. What was the name of the most famous nurse ever? I was thinking of Florence Nightingale. You were thinking of Clara Barton. Okay. Well, there we are. We had two famous nurses, right? Were they the only nurses of the Crimean War? No. But Florence Nightingale, her nurses became famous everywhere and used her techniques and so forth. So Pua was just one of the head ones. And now you remember her name and not the other one, right? Right. Okay. That's okay. You know one. Okay. Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. I don't know who she was. There was a rock singer or a rapper, maybe she's not a singer, who just had a baby and said she didn't have any labor at all. It just popped out. Her name starts with a C, like Celine, not Celine Dion, but something. Anyway, she's infuriating a lot of women who, had a hard delivery, and she's like, "Oh no, it's fine. It just happened. It's just no big deal." But one of our babies came that quickly, though. Did you know this? The doctor came in. He put his arms in the sleeve of the gown, turned around to have the gown tied by the nurse, and my son Benjamin fell out, and he was just there to catch him. He wasn't even tied into the gown yet. And you know what I had to do? Still had to pay him full price. We talked about that. Just saying. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. I'm not sure what to make of that, but it seems to me that probably the women who were serving as midwives were older, more experienced. Maybe some of them had never been married or had never been able to have children of their own. They were helping other women all the time or whatever. But now God blesses them, and this is the blessing he gives. They were able to have families of their own. So a delightful thing for these midwives. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: "Every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." My departing question tonight, that's the last verse of the chapter, is, therefore, did Moses' mother obey Pharaoh? Well, he ended up in the Nile, didn't he? Well, when you put it that way, though, I'm not sure that any Hebrew woman would have thrown her son into the Nile. If a mother truly thought she had to obey Pharaoh, would she just throw him in the drink?
And then fish him out right away and take him home.
No, I was thinking about a woman who understood that Pharaoh meant kill the baby. Would she just throw him in even just to kill him? I don't think she would do that. I don't think anybody threw their child in the Nile. But Moses did get put into the Nile, and then was drawn out again. As Stephen, and my apologies to Stephen for forgetting his name for a minute. But next time we will continue with chapter 2, which is a kind of short, and then we'll go into probably chapter 3, and we'll continue on from there. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.